Welcome to part 2 of my guide to the video game history. In the previous episode we ended with the real beginning of video games hitting the big time, and a game called Pong. Also, there was the release of the first game console, the Magnavox Odyssey. For part 2 I first want to briefly mention Xerox Parc, as although not to do with gaming directly, it was the research lab here set up in 1970 that really revolutionized the computing world. You see, in 1970 Xerox were beginning to worry that the future office might replace paper and they'd become less relevant in the future. So they set up a research lab that would invent the modern personal computer. By 1975 they'd already invented Ethernet, a way of linking PCs together. They'd invented the first graphical operating system, the first mouse. They even had a fully working WYSIWYG in operation. In other words, what you see is what you get, or what you see on the screen, and when you print out, that's what you'll see. Technically, this is the first personal computer, but it was built for future concept, and so was never released, and with parts costing $10,000 to build. So, having spent money with the brightest minds of America to come up with the future office, what did Xerox do? Well, the big cheeses in Xerox just didn't get it and did absolutely nothing, eventually giving it all away for free by showing the machine to a grateful company called Apple, and it helped them work towards their own Macintosh. Moving on to 1975. Al Acorn now believed with the advances of microchip technology and the falling costs of microchips, they could now transfer Pong onto a home machine. Home Pong was released and kept Pong mania alive. But other companies had started to take note of Atari and wanted a piece of the action. Also in 1975, Midway released Gunfight. The game involved two cowboys that could move up and down the screen and shooting each other. Although simple, historically it is an important game because it was the first arcade machine to use microchip technology. Other things happening in 1975, there was a revolution in the home computer world with the Altair 8800 being released. This was the world's first personal computer. It may have been in kit form and not always work when you put it together, but for nerds and geeks across the world, if you wanted your own PC that you could afford, then the Altair was a revelation. It was this machine that caused a certain Bill Gates and Paul Allen, then at university, excited enough to drop out of Harvard and write their own basic operating system for the Altair, setting the wheels in motion for one of the most profitable companies in the world, Microsoft. The following year, in 1976, another first came onto the market, the Fairchild Channel F, the first console to have programmable ROM cartridges in its games. You see, unlike the Odyssey, where the cartridges only changed the parameters of the inbuilt game, the Channel F allowed you to completely play separate games on each cartridge. Arcade games of the time were also beginning to find their stride, with Atari at the forefront. In this year alone, such classic games as Barricade, a great two-player game, Night Driver, the first real driving game, and Sprint were wowing the people of the time. Another big gaming advancement was made by Midway, who in this year released a game called Seawolf. It is notable because it was the first video game to have a high score. This year also brought the world's first text adventure, called Adventure, and was spreading wildfire across university campuses. Also in this year, a guy showed up looking for a job at Atari. Nothing strange there. But he looked exceedingly scruffy, smelled bad, with Atari not sure whether to give him a job or throw him out. Atari decided to give him a chance and gave him the job. They didn't realise that taking on this guy would also take on another shy man who would also turn up. This shy man being a total whiz kid. They worked on the game Breakout for Atari, which was not only a great game, but a great feat of engineering because the Shy Kid dramatically reduced the microchips it needed to run the game, and so reducing the cost for Atari. The man who smelled bad was Steve Jobs, and the shy man was Steve Wozniak, who after the game decided to leave Atari as they planned to set up their own company, boosted by the success of Steve's first own PC that he'd built and had shown at the Homebrew Computer Club that they attended. They offered Nolan Bushnell, CEO of Atari, shares to invest in their idea for a new home PC. But Nolan Bushnell, already tied up financially, had to turn them down. The company Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak started was called Apple, and they would revolutionize the home PC world. Despite impressive strides, Nolan Bushnell at Atari was struggling. Although Atari was successful, they had very little capital, and so, with profits constantly tied up with new R&D, Nolan and the party-hard attitude that Atari had formed, he was struggling to pay everyone's wages each month. He knew that to take the world by storm and releasing a home console, that he would need some serious capital. So in 1976, Nolan Bushnell sold Atari to Warner Communications for round about $30 million. Plus, Nolan would get to keep on as chairman. It seemed a perfect solution to get the money troubles out the way and yet still be able to run his company. Of course, Warner Communications had invested lots of money, and they were determined to change how things were run. Atari, at this time, was also knocking out further variants of the home Pong system, with Super Pong 4. This is notable because it allowed 4 game controllers, and so players, to play at one time. It also gave the players multiple variants of Pong to play. For gaming and computing, perhaps 1977 is one of the most important years. Firstly, let's look back at Steve Wozniak's first PC that had been sold to the general public. Called the Apple I, it had only been in kit form, and it was for enthusiasts who knew what to do with electronics. But they did well enough with this to know that there was going to be a market for this, and all they needed was capital to get a ready-made machine out there, and that it would be massively successful. Therefore, Steve Jobs, using all his eloquence and charm, enticed a venture capitalist to invest in the Apple II, and so the Apple II was released. It was a vast improvement over the Apple I's design, and a true feat of engineering on Steve Wozniak's part meant that the Apple II could be mass-produced and affordable enough for most people. The company Apple was away. Also, around this time, Commodore, known for its calculators, had also started its own personal computer called the Commodore PET 2001, which became very popular at schools across America. But the biggest excitement for us gamers was in October 1977, when Atari finally finished their own console that could interchange game cards. Codenamed Stella, named after Joe DeCure, an employee there's bicycle, and it was finally allowed people to have arcade-quality games at home. They called it the VCS, the Video Computer System. It was only later in 1983 when they re-released it that it did become known as the Atari 2600, named after the microchip that it uses. Also in this year, Midway was starting to make inroads on the mighty Atari with a hugely enjoyable Boot Hill, a sequel to Gunfight with overlay screens to make it look all the more interesting to play. Also released, Destroyer and Drag Race by Atari were great fun. Around universities, Zork was doing the rounds, taking the text adventure even further forward to the next stage of interactive worlds. But in 1978, Nolan Bushnell would have a big argument with Warner's Manny Gerard on how the company Atari was run, when shipment levels were not met for Christmas on the rollout of the VCS. Manny fired Nolan, and so Nolan had to stand on the sidelines as Warner's replaced him as CEO. But don't feel too sorry for Nolan. He went on to his next venture, taking the American chain of diners and gaming arcades called Chuck E. Cheese, which was a huge success in America. All was looking good for Atari in the gaming world, but over in Japan, new companies were springing up, ready to create the next big game to rock the world. The invaders were ready and waiting. Well, I hope you enjoyed part 2, and will listen out for part 3 as we cover the golden age of video game history.